then harder, drenching them both as they stood in the storm. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from the cold, but also from the reality of what was happening. Adam watched her, his heart breaking with every drop that fell. "So what now?" Adam asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Sarah looked at him, her face wet with tears and rain. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "I don't know what happens next. But I do know that I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not." Adam nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "I don't want to lose you, Sarah. But I don't want to keep hurting you either." "Then maybe the best thing we can do is let go," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with the kind of sadness that comes from accepting the inevitable. Adam felt a lump rise in his throat, the reality of her words sinking in. Letting go. It sounded so simple, but it felt impossible. "I'll never stop loving you," Adam said, his voice raw with emotion. Sarah smiled sadly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "And I'll never stop loving you. But sometimes, love means knowing when to walk away." They stood there in the rain, both of them soaked and shivering, but neither willing to move. It was as if they were waiting for something. Some sign, some miracle that would tell them that everything would be okay. But the sign never came. "Goodbye, Adam," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she turned and walked away. Adam watched her go, his heart breaking with every step she took. He wanted to chase after her, to beg her to stay, to promise that he would change. But deep down, he knew that it was too late. As Sarah disappeared into the distance, Adam stood there alone, the weight of their lost love pressing down on him. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last remnants of their relationship, leaving nothing but the cold, empty pier. Adam reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring he had bought months ago, the ring he had planned to give her when the time was right. But now, it felt like a cruel reminder of everything they had lost. He stared at the ring for a long time before finally tossing it into the water. It sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the dark depths below, just like their love. Adam stood there for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into his bones. But eventually, he turned and walked away, leaving the pier, the rain, and the memories of Sarah behind. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of their story. Maybe one day, their paths would cross again, and they would find their way back to each other. But for now, all he could do was hope. Sarah had always been the driven one. She poured her heart and soul into everything she did, whether it was her career or her relationship with Adam. But lately, work had become an unbearable source of stress. As a marketing executive at a growing firm, Sarah was constantly juggling tight deadlines, demanding clients, and an increasingly toxic work environment. The company had been going through a period of rapid expansion, and with that came higher expectations, longer hours, and little room for error. Sarah had always prided herself on being able to handle pressure, but over the past few months, it had become too much. Her boss, Rebecca, was unrelenting, constantly nitpicking her work, sending passive-aggressive emails, and publicly criticizing her in front of colleagues. Sarah tried to shrug it off at first, telling herself that Rebecca was just hard to please. But deep down, The constant barrage of criticism was eating away at her confidence. At home, Sarah kept her work struggles hidden from Adam. She didn't want to burden him with her problems. He already seemed distant, wrapped up in his own world. So Sarah smiled through her tears, pretending everything was fine, while the stress quietly consumed her. And then there was her family. Her younger brother, Michael, had gotten into trouble again, this time with the law. He had always been the black sheep of the family, constantly bouncing from one bad decision to the next. Drugs, fights, gambling. It seemed like every month, Sarah was getting a call from their mother, asking her to come and talk some sense into him. But no matter how many times Sarah tried to help, Michael refused to change. It broke her heart to watch him spiral out of control, and it strained her relationship with her parents, who believed she wasn't doing enough. Sarah felt like she was being pulled in 1,000 different directions, and yet, she couldn't talk to Adam about any of it. He had his own issues, and she didn't want to add to his stress. But the more she kept inside, the more she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her responsibilities. Adam, on the other hand, had been struggling with his own battles, ones that he kept hidden from Sarah. Ever since his mother passed away unexpectedly 2 years ago, Adam had been in a downward spiral of grief. He was close to his father. They shared a special bond that only deepened as Adam grew older. His father had been his role model, his confidant, the man who always had the answers. When his father died of a sudden heart attack, Adam was left reeling. He had never fully processed the grief, choosing instead to throw himself into work, keeping himself distracted from the pain. But grief has a way of catching up with you, and over time, the weight of his loss began to creep into every aspect of his life. Work became more of a burden than an escape. Adam was a financial analyst at a large corporation, and while he had always been good at his job, the recent downturn in the economy put enormous pressure on him. The company was struggling, and layoffs were imminent. Every day, Adam worried that he would be next. He couldn't afford to lose his job, not with the debt he was carrying from his father's medical bills. Even in death, the shadow of his father's illness loomed large over him. The stress was unbearable, but Adam didn't want to worry Sarah. She had enough on her plate, and he didn't want to appear weak or incapable of handling his problems. So he bottled it all up, staying late at the office, avoiding Sarah's questions about his long hours. He would come home, exhausted and emotionally drained, but when Sarah asked how his day was, he would brush her off with a simple, "It was fine." But it wasn't fine. In fact, it had never been worse. Adam felt like he was drowning in responsibilities, with no one to turn to. His friends had their own lives, and his mother had been too grief-stricken since his father's death to offer much support. She relied on Adam for everything now. The bills, the house repairs, the endless phone calls about the estate. It was overwhelming, and it made him feel trapped in a life he didn't recognize. Sarah and Adam had always been partners, supporting each other through thick and thin. But now they were like two ships passing in the night, each weighed down by their own burdens, each too proud or too afraid to reach out to the other. Their individual struggles only compounded the distance between them, and neither of them knew how to bridge the gap. As Sarah's stress at work escalated and her family issues became more complicated, She found herself becoming more irritable and withdrawn at home. Adam noticed the change in her but didn't know how to address it. He was barely holding himself together, and the last thing he wanted was another argument. So, he did what he had always done. He avoided it. He stayed late at work, telling himself it was for the best, that Sarah needed space to deal with her problems. But Sarah didn't need space. She needed Adam. She needed him to ask her how she was really doing, to hold her when the weight of everything became too much. But every time she tried to talk to him, he was either too tired, too distracted, or too caught up in his own head to listen. The silence between them grew louder with each passing day, until it became unbearable. One night, after yet another argument about Adam's long hours at work, Sarah finally broke down. "Do you even care anymore?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Or are we just going through the motions?" Adam looked at her, his heart aching, but he didn't have the energy to fight. "I'm trying, Sarah. I really am. But I don't know what you want from me." "I want you to be here," Sarah replied, tears streaming down her face. "I want you to care. I want you to see how much I'm struggling." Adam closed his eyes, the guilt washing over him. He wanted to be there for her. He really did. But how could he, when he could barely keep his own life from falling apart? "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how to fix this." Their relationship had been hanging by a thread for months, and now it felt like it was finally unraveling. The weight of their individual struggles had pushed them to the breaking point, and neither of them knew how to come back from it. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Sarah packed a bag and left. She didn't say where she was going, and Adam didn't ask. He sat on the couch, staring at the door long after she had gone, his mind racing with everything he wished he had said, everything he wished he had done differently. Sarah drove aimlessly for hours, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't want to leave Adam, but she didn't know how to stay. She loved him, but love wasn't enough anymore. They had become strangers to each other, and the thought of continuing to live in that silence was unbearable. She ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about calling Adam, but what would she say? That she missed him? That she was sorry? That she didn't know how they had gotten to this point, but she desperately wanted to fix it? Adam, meanwhile, sat in the darkened living room, replaying their relationship in his mind. He thought about the early days, when everything had been so easy. He remembered the way Sarah used to laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams. He missed that version of her, the version that hadn't been worn down by life's hardships. But he also missed the version of himself that had been able to make her happy. After days of separation, both Sarah and Adam found themselves at a crossroads. They could either let their relationship crumble completely, or they could choose to fight for it, really fight for it. But fighting meant confronting the issues they had been avoiding for so long, and that terrified them both. Sarah called Adam one evening, her voice soft, hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked. Adam, who had been waiting for this call for days, agreed. They met at a park they used to visit in happier times, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the tension between them. For the first time in months they opened up to each other. Really opened up. Sarah talked about her struggles at work, the constant pressure she felt, and how alone she had been feeling. Adam listened, really listened, and for the first time, he didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. He just let her talk. And then it was Adam's turn. He told Sarah about the financial stress he had been under, about his fears of losing his job and how the weight of his father's death had been suffocating him. He talked about how inadequate he felt, how he didn't know how to be the partner she needed because he didn't even know how to take care of himself. It wasn't a magical fix. There were no grand declarations or promises that everything would be okay. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah and Adam felt like they were on the same page. They both understood that if they wanted their relationship to survive, they had to be willing to do the work, together. They started small, rebuilding the trust that had been broken over time. They made a pact to communicate openly, even when it was hard. They promised to support each other, to be there for each other, no matter how tough things got. Adam started going to therapy to deal with his grief, and Sarah took steps to manage her stress at work. They found ways to reconnect, whether it was through small date nights, taking long walks together, or simply sitting in silence, enjoying each other's company. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was stronger. They had faced the storm and come out the other side, not unscathed, but still standing. If you've ever felt like Sarah and Adam, like life's challenges are pulling you and your loved ones apart, know that you're not alone. Communication and understanding are key to overcoming even the toughest obstacles. At SpeakWell Academy, we believe in helping you find your voice, not just in relationships, but in every area of your life. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Let's continue to learn, grow, and speak well together.